Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today is a little bit of a different episode. We are going to talk about two movies we watched. But in watching these movies, we had a conversation about how there's this genre of film that I don't know if it's been formally declared. We'll talk about that in a bit. So the movies that we watched both came out in 1991. The first was Motorama, which I wouldn't be surprised if no one out there has heard of. And the second one is The Dark Backward, which I am also not going to be surprised if no one's heard of. So first we'll talk about Motorama. In this dark flip side of Home Alone, a 10-year-old boy steals a Mustang and sets off across a surreal American landscape. While trying to win a gas station sweepstakes, he learns some twisted facts of adulthood as he encounters one bizarre obstacle after another. So this was written and directed by Barry Shills, who hasn't necessarily had a long film career. Most notably, he produced Vampire's Kiss, which was the Nicolas Cage vampire movie.
Like
Which,
one of his first
yeah,
films?
well, no, it wasn't. It was 1989, and from what
Okay.
we've seen with Coppola, Nicolas Cage was doing stuff way back in the early 80s. So probably one of the first movies where Nicolas Cage headlined a film.
Yeah.
And which I have not seen, but I've heard it's like a very funny, silly kind of a movie. Motorama, he directed, and then the gentleman Joseph Minion, who wrote Vampire's Kiss, wrote this as well. It is a much, I mean, from everything I've seen of Vampire's Kiss, it seems strange, but this seems much stranger. And it's also important to note that Joseph Minion was the screenwriter of After Hours,
Okay.
which makes a lot of sense. So Motorama features, as it said, a little boy who is telling people he's an adult. He's built these strange, like, platform shoe stilts so he can drive the car and see over the steering wheel. And people seem to, like, know he's not a kid, but then also believe him when he says that he's an adult.
It's as if like only certain authorities can break the illusion of him pretending to be like a teenager, like an adult, quote unquote, meaning 18, 19, or 20. Because other people just let him be, and that's the strange thing about it.
Well, it's very Lynchian in that it has, like, dream logic woven throughout. And so you get the sense that this is not a world where the rules apply, because eventually he goes through a certain event and it causes him to get, like, gray hair, and he's growing stubble on his face. He loses an eye and has to wear an eye patch at one point. And the whole motivation of the character is that there's some game the film just kind of introduces out of nowhere, Motorama, where there's cards, and if you spell out Motorama, you can win $500 million, or it turns out a chance to win $500 million.
Yeah.
The film goes on this long odyssey. He gets to the point where he has all the cards, and then it takes a weird 180, and it's as if none of that happened. And it's a very strange choice, in my opinion. It felt like when you'd see those movies and it felt like they were running out of money, or there was some weird decision by the producers, and it's like two different movies that are kind of cobbled together when you look at the epilogue, like the ending of this movie.
Yeah.
Very strange. So that's Motorama. So the next film that we watched was The Dark Backward. And this is about a garbage man / would-be comic played by Judd Nelson, who grows a third arm out of his back, and that rockets him to a higher level of fame than he was. He's flanked by a hype man, Gus, played by Bill Paxton, who is one of the most disgusting human beings you'll see in a movie. And then Marty, the main character, his wife. Is it his wife or his girlfriend?
Girlfriend.
Rosarita is played by Lara Flynn Boyle. James Caan shows up in this as a doctor for a couple scenes. Wayne Newton has a pretty
has a pretty major character.
So this was written and directed by Adam Rifkin, who will probably be a more familiar name to people in Hollywood. He started out doing indie, low budget types of things, and then around 1994 he wrote and directed The Chase, which is kind of a cult movie that I think has some popularity. He wrote Mouse Hunt.
Okay.
Yep. He wrote Small Soldiers. He directed the film Detroit City Rock. Yeah. Since he also wrote the Underdog movie.
Okay.
And then since then, he's kind of been all over the place. The last film that he was involved in was in 2017, and he wrote and directed. It was Burt Reynolds' final film, The Last Movie Star, which we watched and I reviewed on the blog because it was an A24 movie, and it is bad.
Yeah.
It is a pretty rough send-off for Burt
It also
Reynolds.
did not help that it was supposed to be like based in Tennessee. And it was funny because like he supposed to be landing in like Memphis, but we immediately were like, that is not the Memphis airport. That has to be like Charlotte or somewhere. Like
I don't think they filmed all of it in the location it's set.
And they had a child star that's like was
Ariel Winter,
who like was wearing super short shorts
well,
during
he was
it.
18 or 19.
Yeah,
so that's how they'll justify it.
It's like that classic thing of I am no longer a child star, so I'm now going to be revealing my body more. And which is all fine. More power to her if that was her decision.
We're not reviewing that movie.
But it was not a good movie. I just want to mark.
So Adam Rifkin, mixed bag. Between the two of these, I did find that The Dark Backward I enjoyed more than Motorama, which is not what I went in expecting. Motorama feels like it doesn't have a story.
No, Motorama is really all over the place. It gets to the point that it's very, very bleak. And it's worse off because we're dealing with a 10-year-old boy.
Well, there's implications that he's like sexually assaulted by an older couple.
Yes.
He has his eye gouged out. But then at the same time, there's a certain point where you're like, is he still supposed to be a kid or is he supposed to be a grown-up, but he looks like a kid? Like, it's very confusing. The Dark Backward actually felt like it had a plot structure.
Yeah.
And that it moved from point to point, and it led to at least a somewhat satisfying conclusion, and that everything was wrapped up. And you understood how we got from the beginning to the end.
And you could see it in a really weird, because like Judd Nelson was really good in this film.
Yeah.
It took me a while to recognize him.
It's unlike anyone like if you know him from The Breakfast Club, this is a totally different character.
Yeah, like typically he's playing either someone who's super charming or someone who's like based on his looks. He almost reminded me of Cinema at the like Tim Heidecker's like co-host of like that.
Oh, it's the Neil Hamburger.
Yeah,
Greg Turkington. Yeah,
he has a character that is very eerily similar to the character of this.
It's very anti-comedy.
Yes.
So we were watching these two movies, and it kind of started with Motorama, and it definitely solidified with The Dark Backward. And I started to go, I think this is a genre of movie. And so we started putting together a very extensive list.
Yeah, because we were watching Motorama, and I was like, My Private Idaho.
Yeah. So we're calling this, the name I'm coming up with is Late Stage Capitalist Americana Grotesque.
Yeah. Because
these are movies that mostly the 80s and the 90s. It's a genre that's still around, but not to the extent that it was in the 90s. The 90s was a big genre. Here are the elements of the genre that I've outlined so far. Noir or Gothic styling.
Yeah.
Americana nightmare / labyrinth. Mm-hmm. So it's America or American cities are like a giant maze that these characters get trapped inside of.
Yeah.
So it might be you're in a city, or it's you're in the western part of the U.S. and you're on a road trip, but you're getting lost, kind of a thing.
It also has to feel like it's of this. Of our reality.
I'm not through all the elements, and that's in there.
Okay, you made a whole list.
Other satirical / anti-comedy.
Yeah.
The character of Gus in The Dark Backward is a great example of that. He's not funny. He's obnoxious.
Yeah.
But in that, we're supposed to find that funny, I think.
Yeah.
Otherworldly / surreal, which is what you were talking about. Hopeless search for power. So people are looking for wealth, money, love, and they never get it, right?
Yeah.
Which leads to the happily never after existential horror of this genre. Lots of exploitation and perverse sexuality in these movies, and very camp.
Yes.
Often anachronistic and nostalgic kind of mixed together, where it's especially because these are boomers, a lot of them making it. So it's things from the 60s and 70s are kind of
Or like
incorporated.
50s that they're
Yeah.
like...
Typically, if you were going to rate these movies, you're going to say they're about 3 stars. That's not true for all of them. There are some that exceed that. And a very punk feel to the whole thing.
Yeah.
That they're being made from a place of anger or pushing back against the establishment.
Like, fuck you to the establishment. Because when you look at the cast of The Dark Backward, like, it's a cast that you would assume would be something
like Rob Lowe is in there.
Rob Lowe with a prosthetic nose.
Yeah.
Because I felt like he was playing the same character he was playing like in Wayne's World.
Well, we talked about we're going to go through what movies are and aren't part of this,
Yeah.
because I feel Wayne's World is right on the periphery.
Yeah, but
it's a corporate attempt to make this genre of movie.
I felt like, and it's also like this weird thing of it being like having these group of actors going like, yeah, we're gonna really show it to them that we can do like an artistic stuff, but not really going as far with it.
Well, let's so these tenets of late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque are like dials. So the movies we're going to talk about, these elements are present, but like dials, they're turned up or down in intensity based on the filmmaker, the tone they're going for. So in some of them, it's very pronounced. In some of them are pronounced while others are more muted.
Yeah.
So before we get into the examples, let's talk about the roots of where these movies came from. So the first thing I thought immediately, and it's in The Dark Backward, and I've seen in a lot of other things, is vaudeville. So I almost feel like the Marx Brothers were kind of creating some of the elements of this existential horror. You look at the world that the Marx Brothers inhabit, and it's always some institution that has been like warped and made extreme, and the Marx Brothers' way of coping with the nightmare of being in it is to mock it to its face.
Well, yeah, it's always like with some Marx Brothers, because we ended up watching some of the films.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about like how they have to explain why all of the 3 of them are there. Or it's supposed to be like, oh, the main brother made a ton of money and that's why he's invited. Or they're doing an investigation, but you're just like, the dude's not investigating anything. He's just insulting everybody.
But the thing we're pulling from the vaudeville thing is the sort of shticky comedian thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of a character. It's someone who wants to be famous, but is like grotesque or exaggerated in some way.
And it's also the other fact that nobody questions his partners.
Yes.
Because when you think about one brother doesn't talk, so nobody goes, hey, why doesn't he talk? How do I communicate?
There's like a weirdness that's just accepted.
Yes.
Also, I feel like the Muppets are kind of tied in because the Muppet Show is very vaudevillian.
Yes.
And it's kind of like our world, but it's a world where these autonomous puppets can exist and nobody really questions it.
Mm-hmm.
French New Wave, in that the forms that were accepted as this is film are being pushed against. I don't think that the late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque is as revolutionary as the French New Wave was in redefining how a movie could be structured and what it could look like, but I feel like they're definitely drawing from that.
Yeah.
And from there, Federico Fellini, particularly on casting of people that have very, what might be considered grotesque or very unique, eccentric looks to them.
Yeah.
Also, Akira Kurosawa, for the way he portrays the world as kind of this rotten cesspool of grime, where you can have heroes, but the world is never really going to be changed in any way. And I'm thinking a lot of like Rashomon and Seven Samurai kind of have that, where it's like it's a rotten world that our characters have to suffer through.
Yeah, especially like towards the beginning of the film of the Seven Samurais, where you have you had like 2 or 3 other characters that aren't from the village but are mocking them as they're looking for the samurai.
Well, they're in like
grotesque upon themselves, but somehow they have more money than these farmers.
Well, they're all samurai.
Yeah,
they're in a village of a bunch of like Ronin, and these are supposed to be your heroes. And you
Yeah.
think about a movie like After Hours, and it has that similar thing of
Yeah.
the outsider going into a place that they don't belong and becoming the object of ridicule.
Yeah.
Right. Uh, John Cassavetes, in that he was a very independent filmmaker and made films about people, and they didn't have necessarily happy endings. I'm thinking of like A Woman Under the Influence
Mhm.
has that kind of Americana grotesque to it.
Yeah.
John Waters is like the pope of this genre.
Oh, yeah. It's like he is the granddaddy, the one showing it to you because he watching you squirm just makes him laugh.
Or the thing that he brings that these other people don't is the queerness.
Yes.
And I feel like queerness, there's a lot of queer coded characters and situations in these movies, even if the people making them aren't LGBTQ, or that they're appropriating queer iconography and using it. We'll talk about like Pee-wee being a queer man, and like Pee-wee's Big Adventure is late stage capitalist Americana grotesque.
Yeah.
It's just one that you can watch, and it's a little more family friendly.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like giallo, the Italian giallo genre, it's like Dario Argento, Suspiria, Deep Red, in the color palettes. Oftentimes, late stage capitalist Americana grotesque has a very cartoon look to its worlds. Not all the time. Remember, it's one of those dials where they kind of turn it up or down. The Dark Backward, for example, very bold primary colors on the clothing and the sets. Motorama, also cartoonish, but in a different way.
Yeah.
In the way things are shot, it's almost shot like a TV commercial in a way. I think Elaine May and Mike Nichols, when you think
Yeah.
of like The Graduate, isn't late stage capitalist Americana grotesque, but it's a cousin. It's a very close cousin.
Yeah.
Elaine May with like The Heartbreak Kid, Mikey and Nikki.
Mikey and Nikki especially.
Because especially it's characters wandering through the night. That's a big part of
Yeah.
this genre. Is your characters are almost like in an eternal nighttime. I think Stanley Kubrick brought some to this, particularly through two films, Lolita and Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah.
In those sort of you're in a nightmare world and there's nothing you can really do about it, sort of a thing. Like Lolita, where she ends up at the end of that story, she's fucked. Humbert is also like a rotten person, and he never gets his comeuppance. And that way, there's kind of a film noir element, and that's when we talk about the noir or gothic styling. Mel Brooks, I think, the producers specifically, is
Yeah.
right on the fringe of this.
Yeah, it's just the difference is like they have a happy ending of sorts.
Well, they end up in prison.
Even though when you think about it, they didn't. Their whole idea was supposed to be this play supposed to fail.
Well, think about the tenets when we apply it to that. It doesn't have the noir gothic styling. It is an Americana nightmare. They're trapped in this machine. Satirical anti-comedy. You think it's funny to us now, but at the time, Mel Brooks' sense of humor was not the standard sense of humor.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who did not think that movie was funny, especially making Hitler jokes. There is a surrealness to it. The people that they meet to help do the play, both cast and crew, the hopeless search for wealth.
Yeah.
Of course. Perverse sexuality, the secretary, is weird, creepy stuff. And then the way Zero Mostel's character is always around the old women. And he's just doing it for money. Happily Never After.
Yeah.
Definitely has that. I would say that's one of those movies that exceeds the 3 stars and goes into like 4-star territory. Where this is the better one. So, but I think one of the chief influences of this whole late stage capitalist Americana grotesque genre is David Lynch, without a doubt.
Yeah.
You have not seen Eraserhead, but eventually at some point, maybe the day he dies, we'll watch Eraserhead. It has that, Blue Velvet has that, Twin Peaks has that, where it's this sort of, has that anachronism element. It has, but what comes with the anachronism is the Americana nightmare. Like, especially when we look at The Return and the way Twin Peaks feels then, it doesn't feel so sunny and cheery anymore. It feels like we're in a dark version of things.
When you think about how David Lynch talks about how his biggest influence of all is having to do with Wizard of Oz. And you look at all these films and it is supposed to be,
and that's the first like American fairy tale.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like you're going for a goal and you're not really sure if you're going to get there or not. But I think it's almost as if we took that story and we made it even more grotesque over time.
Yeah.
Because it's not just
Because would
little,
Return to Oz
yeah.
be late stage capitalist Americana grotesque?
Yeah, I mean, like when we talked about like Martin Scorsese's like
After Hours?
After Hours, it is when you think
It's
about
the
it,
Wizard of Oz.
it's the Wizard of Oz. All he wants to do is go home.
Yeah.
But he's turned into something else in the end of it.
And it's a magical process that happens to him.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to go through what films are part of the late stage capitalist Americana grotesque canon and what are not. All right, we are back and we are continuing our conversation about a genre we've kind of stumbled upon, because I don't want to say that we're the first people to figure this out.
I'm sure there's someone out there with a letterbox account
But I
that
like
has
the
brought
name
it all
late
together.
stage capitalist Americana grotesque. So we're going to look at the 1980s, which is where you really start to see the first films that fit into this genre come out. One of the films I thought of was The Blues Brothers.
Okay.
Now, people might go, well, that's more of like a crowd pleaser movie. But if we think about the tenets of this, the elements of this genre, it doesn't necessarily have a noir gothic styling. It is an Americana nightmare labyrinth.
Yeah.
Satirical, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Otherworldly, surreal.
Yeah.
There's things that like there's a fantasy element to the movie.
Well, especially when people start singing.
Yeah, out of nowhere. A hopeless search for power. Because if I remember right, do they end up back in prison at the end of the movie? I think
they do.
They try to give it more of a happy tinge at the end. Exploitation, perverse sexuality.
I think they are exploiting Black people to a certain extent, even though it's supposed to be an homage that they're kind of like, oh no, we think
The front men are white, yeah.
But it's like we think that these Black artists are great. That's why we got the Black artist exactly.
Which ties into the anachronistic or nostalgic element.
Yes, and it's just like, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who benefited the most out of this film, not the Black musicians that they got to participate.
Happily Never After.
Yes.
I would say it's more than 3 stars. I would say it's at least 3.5, 4-star movie. Like it is a pretty solid movie. And it definitely has a punk feel to it, like a lot of the SNL stuff did. And then related to that, I would say Neighbors, which is another Dan Aykroyd, Belushi team up, is much more in the genre.
Yes.
It feels more similar to something like The Dark Backward in that it does feel like it takes place in a nightmare reality. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend Neighbors if you haven't seen it. It's not, but it is a 3-star-ish movie, right? It's not great.
Yeah, it's 3-star-ish, and isn't Carrie Fisher in it, basically playing the same character as her Suburbs?
No,
or
no.
She in it?
No, she's not.
I think it was someone other.
Are you thinking of like Shampoo?
It's probably like a brunette with short hair.
Because I did think that like Hal Ashby's work is the nice version of this.
That is true.
His doesn't go as dark.
He doesn't go as dark, but his hippie ways do.
But there is this sort of Americana nightmare element, but he's like, there's hope. He still believes there's hope. I would say that Being There is probably the closest Ashby movie to late stage capitalist Americana grotesque. Brazil, I think fits, even though it's British. It's filmed in England. It's made by a Midwestern American. I think he's Midwestern or like East Coast, Terry Gilliam. And it has these elements in it, especially that labyrinth element and the weird otherworldliness.
Well, I think it's also this combination of understanding that in the future, like America and England are just gonna warp into one another and like a fucked up entangled mess.
The sort of industrial sprawling nightmare. The Goonies, it's right on the edge, right?
It has a little bit more hope.
It's Spielberg produced.
Yeah.
I would also say late stage capitalist Americana grotesque is anti-Spielbergian in that Spielberg's worlds are full of awe and wonder, while these films are closer to saying the world is an awful place and it will destroy you.
Kind of like staring into the grotesque.
Yeah, so the Goonies is right on the fringe. It could be adjacent, maybe. Mm-hmm. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, straight down the middle. Perfect fit for this genre. Beetlejuice.
Yes.
For sure. Scorsese's The King of Comedy and After Hours both fall into this.
Yep.
Uh, Alex Cox's Repo Man with Emilio Estevez and Harry Dean
Oh,
Stanton.
yes.
I feel like almost a textbook example.
Yeah.
John Hughes' Weird Science. I think John Hughes's movies are kind of close to this, but Weird Science, because it has the sort of over-the-top surreal grotesque elements that are like science fictional,
Yeah.
it kind of jumps into this realm.
Is the Weird Science one is that they create a woman?
Yes.
Okay.
Or would you say it's adjacent?
I think it's adjacent because I think she's a little bit too consensual to being whatever it is.
But it's the perverse sexuality and exploitation, right?
It's there, but I think it's like if she was more unwilling, then she would.
Well, let's
work.
go back to the elements. Does not have noir gothic styling. It's Americana nightmare.
Kind of, yeah.
I think the nightmare is more metaphysical. It's the situation they get themselves into. It has a surreal tinge. Bill Paxton, once again, who was in The Dark Backward, is the older brother who gets turned into like a talking pile of shit at the end of the movie.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot.
And they
about
manifest those like biker demons or whatever. Like it is very strange for a John Hughes movie. Hopeless search for lust, like sex. That's what it is. Exploitation, perverse sexuality. I'd say there's definitely camp elements in it.
Okay, so if Weird Science is a part of this, I feel like there's another film that we've not thought about that has to be on there. It's the guy that was in Three Company,
John Ritter.
and it's his wife and him stuck in these channels.
Remote Control or Stay Tuned or something.
Yes.
I was thinking about that movie. I've never seen that movie, but I've seen the trailer.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, from everything I can see, it is that kind of. It goes much in the surreal dial is turned up real high on that one. Yeah. Better Off Dead with John Cusack, I think is perfect, especially the Americana aspect.
Yeah.
And it also has Dan Schneider, who his whole career is like an Americana nightmare. Blue Velvet we mentioned. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, because Tobe Hooper was going for more of a satirical comedic bent.
Yeah.
And Dennis Hopper definitely always feels like an Americana nightmare when he shows up in something. Film that most of our audience probably hasn't seen, but 1988's Society or 89 Society. Very bizarre body horror movie about the wealthy.
Yeah, it's one of those films that I do not welcome to ever watch again.
And then I would say that George Miller's The Witches of Eastwick, do you think it qualifies?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so looking at the elements of the genre, noir gothic styling.
Yeah.
I said some gothic, yeah. Americana nightmare.
Yes.
Yeah. Satirical, for sure. Yeah. Otherworldly surreal. I mean, it's a world where witches and the devil exist. Hopeless search for power.
Yeah.
Especially for Jack Nicholson's character. Yeah. Perverse sexuality, exploitation, yeah. Camp.
Yeah.
Happily Never After. For his character, the witches end up having a good ending. Typically 3 stars. I'd say it's more of a 3.5. It's not a movie I'm that in love with. I don't necessarily know if it has a punk feel. I feel like George Miller's work often does, but I don't know about The Witches of Eastwick, you know?
I mean, it's women also kind of embracing their sexuality.
Yeah.
So
Sam Raimi's Crime Wave from 1985, which I know people listening to the show are probably like, "A what?"
I'm a what right now?
You recommended it.
What was it? Oh yeah, because it took me a while to remember now. Because
you didn't remember the title, but you were describing the plot.
Yeah. It
has especially the kind of camp, anachronistic, waking nightmare. It's like nighttime almost the entire movie. Cronenberg's The Fly, or is it adjacent?
I think it's adjacent.
Yeah, because it isn't quite satirical enough.
No, because I think The Fly is a little bit more serious and like.
What about like Videodrome? I think Cronenberg is almost kind of doing his own genre.
Yeah.
But it's a cousin to this genre. Yeah. They're very interrelated. Weird Al's UHF.
I don't think I remember watching that. Like
it's where he runs a television station and it's a bunch of like kind of parodies of commercials and shows.
Yeah, I have not seen that one.
I would say it's close. Tapeheads is a movie you haven't seen with Tim Robbins and John Cusack. I believe it's very much this. Joe Dante's The Burbs.
I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I know like that is.
Bits and pieces. You haven't watched the whole thing?
No, I haven't watched the whole thing in a
You
long time.
like fall asleep or something while you're watching it?
I probably did.
It's one of my childhood faves.
I know it's one of your favorite movies.
Adjacent. I thought Hellraiser,
Yeah.
A Nightmare on Elm Street, like that franchise, is not fully this.
There is almost like there, even in the second film, when the woman is like in a white suit.
I feel like Hellraiser Part 2 is a little closer to late
Yeah.
stage late stage capitalism, Americana, Grotesque. The National Lampoon Vacation films.
Yes.
They're
There is adjacent feel. It is this desperation, especially like Chevy Chase's character of just wanting this to be perfect and not understanding. It feels like along with saying that it reminds me of Wizard of Oz, it kind of reminds me of like a horrible version of The Hobbit when one person just wants to go back home again.
True. Would you say Raising Arizona falls into this category?
Yes.
Okay. Because I was thinking the three filmmakers I could think of that kind of are the carriers of this idea. Oh, we forgot about Little Monsters with Fred Savage.
Yes.
I definitely think that fits in the genre. The three filmmakers I could think of were Tim Burton,
Yes.
the Coen brothers.
Tim Burton before he started going into remakes.
This is like Tim Burton. I would say Edward Scissorhands is almost kind of getting to the end of him being a part of this genre. The Coen brothers. And Sam Raimi.
Yes.
And the Coen brothers and Sam Raimi are going to, and Tim Burton, all continue their influence in this genre into the 90s. So when we get to the 1990s, that's where the list is massive. And like the list of filmmakers is even larger. So I'm just going to kind of go through and we can kind of say adjacent or not, right? Dan Aykroyd's Nothing But Trouble.
This is part of it.
Yes, late stage capitalist Americana night or Grotesque. That's what it is. Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys.
I think it fits. It's almost like.
Well, let's look at the elements again. Noir Gothic styling. Definitely. Yeah. Americana Nightmare Labyrinth. Time is that for Bruce Willis's character. Satirical or anti-comedy. Otherworldly surreal.
Yeah.
Hopeless search for, in this instance, to fix humanity. Exploitation, perverse sexuality. I don't know about that necessarily.
No, there's exploitation of people, but not sexuality.
Camp or anachronistic nostalgic elements. I feel like there is a nostalgia for the present almost.
Yeah.
Happily Never After. Existential.
Yes.
Typically 3 stars. I think 12 Monkeys is somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4-star movie. Punk feel. Yes. Definitely. So I think 12 Monkeys qualifies. The People Under the Stairs, that Wes Craven movie. The Dark Backward in Motorama, which we just watched. Nightbreed, Clive Barker's Nightbreed.
Yeah, definitely.
Death Becomes Her.
Yes. Look at me going like, yes.
This one, I'm not sure. Dick Tracy.
I think it's a little bit too comic book cartoonish at times.
It's being influenced by Tim Burton by someone who doesn't understand that early Tim Burton work. So like Warren Beatty does not get Tim Burton.
But I think he's also taking everything a little too serious, especially when it comes to something that was written by a fascist.
I mean, yeah, with Chester Gould, who wrote Dick Tracy, is like a psychopath. Joe's Apartment. We talked about Twin Peaks, so I think like Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah.
John Waters' Serial Mom.
Oh, I mean, he's the granddaddy of it. He's making it.
But I feel like, would Hairspray qualify? I'm like, it's borderline.
The original, yes. The remake, no.
The Broadway musical, yeah. I think the Broadway musical loses the punk feel that the original Hairspray had. The first couple Child's Play movies. I haven't seen the first one, We watched the second one, and I would say it's at least adjacent.
Yeah, I think it's adjacent because it's a little bit too Pee-wee at times, and not in a good way.
I would say not that at all. If it was too much Pee-wee, it would fit. I'd say
Yeah.
it's too much like B horror,
Mm-hmm.
like where it's just kind of following some horror tropes and not really doing anything
Well,
interesting
I
with
think
them.
it also just kind of like, oh, so where's the arc? This kid's not going to learn anything.
Well, there's like the nightmare of capitalism.
Yeah.
That's in it for sure. Alex Winter's Freaked.
Yes. Yes, and yes again. That movie is like embedded in my brain because we rented it so many times and I hated watching it. But is it is everything that we're talking about in this genre of it being surreal and then just also
A nightmare world.
yeah, like it's supposed to be like you know what the solution of them going back to human was,
I
right?
don't remember.
It's mac and cheese.
Oh yeah.
And like only one person doesn't want to eat the mac and cheese, so he stays the way he is, which is ridiculous.
Another Adam Rifkin film, Mouse Hunt.
Yeah.
Or is it adjacent?
I think it's adjacent because it's more like kid friendly.
But we've included kid friendly in here.
What's kid friendly that's like at the
Oh, we're about to get to it.
Okay.
Dennis the Menace. Is it late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque?
Yeah, and it is super nostalgic for the 1950s, 60s kind of era.
And it's the Christopher Lloyd character takes it into like a dark place.
Yeah, I think with which one was the one before we're comparing to Dennis?
Mouse Hunt.
Mouse Hunt. I think because there's no child in peril, it doesn't fit for me. But I will give it to you if you feel like that is.
Maybe Mouse Hunt's closer to like dark fantasy kind of something.
Yeah. Like it could fit, but it's just something's missing.
It definitely feels it's in the orbit of the genre. The Addams Family movies, particularly Addams Family Values, because of Joan Cusack's character.
Yes. Oh God, I love that character so much.
He feels like a perfect character for this genre.
Like the reason that she does
Debbie,
because like her mom and dad didn't get her Malibu Barbie.
Yeah.
Serial killer because she didn't get the Barbie doll.
I just remember Raul Julia going, Debbie. Like, it's so good. It's so good in that movie. I don't think the first Bill and Ted's movie is, but I do think Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey is late stage capitalist Americana nightmare.
I mean,
they die, they meet death, they go to heaven, they meet God.
I feel like Alex Winter must have influenced it somehow.
I definitely think so.
Because like when you think about
he's also a child star who had a fucked up experience as a kid. And I think those people, because like Adam Rifkin's like an old, like he was like hanging around kids like Alex Winter his whole life. He's like, I think born and raised in Los Angeles. So it's those people who were like fried under the sun of LA are the ones who make these movies. Like Tim Burton feels like a goth LA kid. You think about the suburb in Edward Scissorhands has a very like California feel to it.
Yeah.
Throw Mama from the Train.
Yes.
I think, and we also talk about Matilda.
Yeah.
Danny DeVito feels like a director in like Death to Smoochie.
Mm-hmm.
Our late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque for sure.
Yes.
David Fincher's Seven. Or adjacent.
It's adjacent. It's that cousin that like you all had the same aesthetic, but this one got cooler somehow.
Well, it's
like
there because it never names the city.
Yeah.
That's what adds that surreal, otherworldly element to it. And it is so like the exploitation, perverse sexuality thing is very prevalent.
I think what really marks it for me about it not being there, but it is the adult, is how it feels more mature, especially that scene between like Gwyneth Paltrow and like Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
Where they're having a talk about like his and like her husband's job and how she's like, I was a teacher, like I worked in schools that had needs, but nothing like this. And you could see like life is crushing her slowly. And versus like in the films that we are mentioning, like just people are kind of absorbed in their own fantasy that they're not willing to see what's going on, or they just have drifted into the madness of
It
it.
doesn't have that satirical dark comedy
Yeah.
element. Yeah. No, not even a little bit. David Lynch's Wild at Heart.
Yes.
I feel that's almost like if you were going to teach a course on this genre,
You would have to start it with that because I think it's between like Wizard of Oz, and then Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. All wanting to go home.
but I
All
think
just
Alice in
going.
Wonderland's too British. I think
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz was a great pull because it is American first.
Yes.
And so the horror of these movies comes from that Americana aspect.
Yeah.
The Austin Powers series,
I don't think so.
I think it's adjacent.
Yes. I think there's a darkness to it, but I think Mike
Myers. How could you forget Mike Myers' name?
I think he's a little too upbeat. I think he is because I always think about like the Guru and how he was kind of surprised that people were just like
Hated it.
and
It's
thought
fucking awful.
It is awful, and along with that, it is just like cultural appropriation that we're like making fun of someone culture.
Mariska Hargitay.
But it's
I remember
supposed
that.
to be like, oh, like no, he was like a white boy adopted into this family, and it's just
Because
not good.
when I'm looking at the elements, it doesn't have noir gothic styling. There isn't the Americana Nightmare Labyrinth. It's not satirical anti-comedy.
It is very British at the end.
Yeah. And the same reason that what was the other thing we were talking about that was too British? I forget. Too British. So Kids in the Hall and Kids in the Hall Brain Candy.
Oh, we're talking about Alice in Wonderland.
Oh yeah.
British. Yes. Yeah.
I think the show and then Brain Candy is like the show pushed into overdrive.
Yeah, and it's also worse when you find out like the conditions that they made it under.
Those people were living in like late stage capitalist Americana nightmare.
Yeah, like David Follier, like
Dave Foley
was like not in the group per se because he had taken another job.
We was in LA doing stuff, yeah.
And like they felt off with him, and then he was in the middle of a divorce. And like when you find out the reason that like under the pressure that they made it, you can almost feel it's even more grotesque than their normal stuff that kind of has like at the least like there's a whimsy about it, right?
True.
There's like this funniness, even though it's kind of dark.
There's nothing hopeful or bright about Brain Candy.
No, and it is like when you find out like how they made it under, it makes it even
that is true.
Punches you in the gut.
It's one of the few things that Lorne Michaels allows to be that dark. Anything SNL related, he'll pull back on.
Yeah.
But Kids in the Hall, he just let them go to this bleak, horrible place. Though something like Stuart Saves His Family or the This Is Pat movie, are those late stage capitalist Americana grotesque?
I don't think This Is Pat because I feel like it's just not good at the end. There's no fantasy about it. Stuart Saves His Family. I would have to like reread it, like the plot, because it's just like, what's the fantasy element of it?
I do feel that like Lorne Michaels likes to come to the edge of this genre, but he doesn't like criticizing capitalism.
Because he is a huge capitalist himself. And I think it's like he only allowed it with Kids in the Hall because it was like, well, they're Canadian, so they can get away with it.
Gremlins 2, The New Batch.
Yeah.
And I think it was the human characters specifically, like Clamp, the Trump analog in it, it's very surreal. And like the first movie I don't count because I think the human characters are a little too grounded. It's definitely a dark comedy, but I think Gremlins 2, The New Batch just makes the human characters as bizarre as the Gremlins.
But it was necessary. Wasn't the creator didn't want to make the second movie?
He didn't want to make a sequel.
Just like, so I'll just make it as absurd as possible.
Darkman.
Yeah.
For sure. I think early Adam Sandler, these two movies in particular, Happy Gilmore and Billy Madison, are at least adjacent to the genre.
Yeah, Happy Gilmore especially. That's the one that like, he's doing golf, right? Yeah, because it's like this weird thing about this guy who becomes like almost like a pro golf player out of nowhere, which is such a 90s ish movie when you think about it.
But it's like in a cartoon world.
Yeah.
But they don't dial it up too much. Billy Madison, they dial it up a lot.
Especially like the weird sexual stuff.
Yeah.
Like the principal that used to be a wrestler who's into like into the character that like Adam Sandler
Yeah,
playing, but you're not really sure if it's supposed to be like, has he felt anything else for anyone else?
But again, I feel it's more Lorne Michaels and his production company, Broadway Video, I think, appropriating this genre from other people a little bit. The Problem Child movies.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that.
They're slightly more family friendly, though I remember watching them as a kid and being like, I don't think I should be watching this. This is pretty fucking like edgy for
I think we briefly talked about like the problem child is that redhead kid.
Junior.
Oh,
and he's
made that song for the
no, that song's been around for a long time. But he is a horrible actor. That kid.
Yeah, he's like terrible.
What am I gonna do tonight? He's so awful. But like that adds to the like Americana grotesqueness.
Yeah, it's like Jason Ritter is like
John Ritter, not
John
Jason.
Ritter.
Don't put that evil on Jason Ritter.
Let his son be clean.
Yeah.
But like he does the most.
Well, it's his dad running the hardware store is so like capitalist Americana, and to be running for like office. I think he's running for some political office.
The insane thing of also like his actual wife plays like his wife in the first film, and like
she leaves him for the serial killer played by Michael Richards. It's a family film.
I would really love if somebody just clipped that in a family film.
Frank Oz's Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
And I
especially like with the original cut towards the end. When they snip a bit of
Roger Corman, I would say, is one of the roots of this. The guy who made the original Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
And he made a lot of those like schlocky B movies.
Yeah.
Got a lot of people their starts. I had thought for a bit like, oh, is Dirty Rotten Scoundrels in this? But I think because it's set in the French Riviera, it's characters you might find in a late stage capitalist Americana grotesque movie, but they're kind of classed up and they give them a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as dark as a lot of these movies go. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the original movie, but I mean, I haven't seen the show that much. I feel like the show might veer a bit away.
I think the show veers a little bit away, even though Buffy really doesn't get a happy ending at all when you view her. But like, especially like the original movie, that fits. I mean, and like Pee-wee was in that film.
Yeah, he's the remember. Alexander Payne's Election. Late stage capitalist Americana grotesque. I see you're thinking, so let's go back to our elements here. Noir Gothic styling, no. Americana Nightmare Labyrinth. It is for the main character, right? Satirical?
Yeah.
Otherworldly or surreal?
No.
Maybe the characters feel a little heightened. Remember, it's a dial. It's a dial. I think it's a little. Hopeless search for fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Exploitation, perverse sexuality. Tracy Flick is like statutory raped by one of her teachers.
Yeah.
Camp or nostalgic in some way.
I think it's camp. It's not nostalgic.
I think it's nostalgic for Alexander Payne, nostalgic for the Midwest, like Nebraska and that kind of shit. A little. Happily Never After.
Yeah.
Typically 3 stars. I do think Election is like a 4-star movie. I think it's great. Punk feel.
I don't think so.
So would you say it qualifies, or do you think Election is adjacent?
I think it's adjacent.
I don't know. The TV series, I thought about Twin Peaks, but X-Files, and thought, no. You hadn't seen it, and I need to go back and watch the whole thing. Millennium, which was another Chris Carter show that gets very bleak, and it came out around the millennium. That one we'll kind of put on the back burner. It isn't as funny, so it doesn't apply. Joe versus the Volcano.
Yeah, that fits.
I think it has that. It's the world is weird enough that it falls into that category. My Own Private Idaho, and that's like a 5-star, perfect late stage capitalist Americana grotesque.
It is such a good film. It was
heartbreaking and beautiful.
I really loved how when we ended that film, we were just kind of like, "Fuck! It took us this long to watch."
Yeah, like why did I not watch this movie years ago? It's so good.
Like I appreciate it more now that I watched it.
If I watched it in my 20s, I don't think I would have appreciated it. Yeah. We talked about Blue Velvet before.
Yeah.
4 Rooms, the anthology film with Tim Roth as the bellhop. And I think Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino, and Allison Anders direct each of the segments.
Yeah, I remember.
Like Allison Anders did the one where there's like witches. I think Madonna is in it.
Yeah, I think she has like electrical tape on her
Something like
titties.
that.
Like,
It's a movie I've only ever seen once, and it's definitely like in that 3 or less.
I think
It has a punk feel for
it
sure.
does. I don't really remember much of that film. I remember watching it when I wasn't supposed to watch it.
I think Tarantino, Anders, and Rodriguez all fall into that kind of punk film aesthetic, and
Yes,
especially at that time in the
yeah,
early
'cause I remember,
90s.
like they did like that
Grindhouse.
thing together,
Yeah.
so that makes sense.
The skit comedy series Mr. Show.
Ooh.
You think about the topics that they address on the show and the way they thematically talk about those topics.
I am going to lean towards a yes.
I think a strong yes.
Yeah, with like I can understand if anyone who's listening to this and just arguing against the podcast, I would really love to hear
this is an episode where like I want your feedback.
Yeah, like I would understand how someone could argue against it, but I think there is a lot to be that Mr. Show like does include about it and how they kind of like make fun of that time and understanding how fucked up the States is without really getting you down.
It's much more biting than SNL.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Now, one that doesn't go quite as satirical about institutions and things, The State/Stella. Or is it adjacent
I
to?
think it's adjacent. I think
last night when you were high, you said a strong yes.
Yeah, but I was high, and I think it's just like even though there's some whimsy that needs to be about this, they're a little too whimsical.
Yeah, it's a little too cutesy.
Yeah, and I think it's also just part of me wants to almost be like, how much did it stick to your ribs when you did this? And I feel like none of them did.
Strangers with Candy and all of the work of Amy Sedaris.
Yes.
I think she is one of the big creators of late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque.
Yeah, and she like her whole personality, everything that there is something sharp about it without you really it's almost like getting a paper cut. You're just kind of surprised that you got cut, but it still hurts.
2 Farrelly Brothers films, Kingpin and There's Something About Mary.
Kingpin, yes. Something About Mary.
No. Oh, fuck you. There's Something About Mary. Let's go back here. Doesn't have the noir gothic styling, but remember, it doesn't have to have all of them. No. Americana Nightmare Labyrinth. It's a labyrinth of connections. Okay. Mary has connected to so many people. And for Mary, it's a nightmare, right? All these men that want her and are being fucking creeps about it. Satirical. Very much so.
Yeah.
Otherworldly, surreal. I feel like by the time you get to the end and like Chris Elliott's character and then the dude with the crutches, like it gets real weird. Hopeless search for Ben Stiller's character, right? Hopeless search for love. Very camp.
Yeah.
Happily Never After. He does end up with Mary. That's the one there. Typically 3 stars. Punk feel.
I don't think it has a punk
feel. I would argue that there's something about Mary. I do think Kingpin is stronger.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something about Mary fits enough. P.T. Anderson's Magnolia.
Yeah.
What about Boogie Nights?
No.
What about Punch Drunk Love?
Yes.
I think Punch Drunk Love is actually stronger than Magnolia when I think about it.
Yeah, even though like Magnolia frogs do fucking rain.
Yeah. Robert Rodriguez is From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yes.
It does feel like that kind of apocalyptic end of America kind of feel to it. One of your childhood favorites, and I feel it goes along with Problem Child, the great double feature, Drop Dead Fred.
Yes.
Tales from the Crypt, selected episodes.
I think selected episodes, yes.
Some episodes it veered into pure horror, and others it had that kind of satirical edge to it. Wes Anderson's Rushmore.
Yeah.
I think of all his films, it's the only one I would put in this category.
Yeah, because I think it's this character who is a teenager but views himself as an adult and managed to weasel himself into like adult situations where he shouldn't be in the beginning.
Motorama.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like that's like the plot of Motorama, right? It's a child behaving as an adult as a means of survival, kind of a thing. Even
though like for him it's
very different home life for those characters. the Brady Bunch movies, at least cousins to this.
Yeah. They're a little bit too self-aware about
Well,
it.
here, let's look at the things. They definitely don't have the styling.
No.
Americana Nightmare. You think about like
It's a
tie
nightmare
that in
for
tie
the
that into the
neighbors.
nostalgic camp
Yeah,
element.
it's a
Or think about Michael McKean's family. They're the Americana Nightmare, right? They're so dysfunctional and they hate each
Yeah.
other. Satirical,
Mhm.
surreal,
Yeah.
hopeless search for. I feel like the Bradys are never hopeless. Everyone around them is. Exploitation or perverse sexuality. The second movie, there's like stuff about Greg and Marcia that they hint at.
Yeah, and I think it's also like in the first film, one of
Marcia's lesbian friend.
who just really wants
Yeah.
her and like she's not picking up on it.
Camp and nostalgic. Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
Happily Never After. Nah, not for this. Typically 3 stars.
Yeah.
Punk feel. Though I believe the woman who made it does have like a punk background.
Yeah.
So I think she brings that to it. It's that sort of punk taking something from your childhood and like recontextualizing it. We're going to talk about the filmmakers real briefly because there's some movies I forgot to write down the titles, but they're definitely in here. And then we'll take a break and talk about the 2000s to present.
Okay.
So Todd Solondz, Welcome to the Dollhouse, Happiness.
Oh my God.
Todd Solondz is like the saint of late stage capitalist Americana grotesque in the 90s.
Yeah.
And into the 2000s a little bit. I think Crispin Glover's whole persona is this genre.
Was like, should we have Back to the Future in there or not?
Zemeckis feels like he's creating some of it. There's a movie, I cannot think of the name of it, that Crispin Glover was in with one of the guys from WKRN in Cincinnati.
I have no idea.
You've never seen it. I saw it. It's called like Ed and something, and it's very weird and like goes nowhere, and it fits in the genre perfectly. Quentin Tarantino, especially the nostalgia camp exploitation satirical stuff, that's where he really shines. I think Steve Buscemi's career in the 90s and the 2000s is this. Todd Haynes. So we're talking about Poison. We're talking about Safe.
Yes.
We're talking about, I'm trying to think of other, Velvet Underground, the kind of a Britishy, it touches on it, but it becomes its own thing.
Yeah, when I think of Safe, it's almost like a sophisticated version of everything that we're talking
That's like
about.
A 5-star version.
Yeah.
And then Greg Araki, and you've only ever seen Mysterious Skin that he did, which is less satirical. His other work, like Doom Generation and things like that, are very otherworldly nightmare kind of a thing. So we've kind of spent some time really laying out the groundwork of the canon here. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what this genre became in the 2010s and where you can see it still today. Welcome back once again as we continue to talk about this genre we have kind of stumbled upon of late stage capitalist Americana grotesque. So now we're going to kind of talk about what happened in the 2000s and the 2010s. I think there's a lot less examples of these movies when we get into the 2000s. They're still there, especially in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and it's also kind of hard because we can't watch every film.
Yeah. So here is some of the films I thought would qualify. American Psycho.
Yes.
I think it has that satirical exploitation, perverse sexuality thing going on. The city is a labyrinth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Steven Soderbergh's Logan Lucky. It's maybe adjacent because it does have more of an upbeat, happy ending. It's very Americana.
Yeah, and I think it fits with the noir thing because there is like a story element going on.
It's not Happily Never After, though.
No.
We're going to come back to one movie at the end. Fight Club.
I think it fits.
I think, yeah. I think Chuck Palahniuk's writing actually is late stage capitalist Americana grotesque.
Yeah, especially as coming from a gay man who was masking as straight and like having to deal with like the impact of the, heteronormative behavior.
Well, then you go back to John Waters, we talk about the camp aspects, right? Donnie Darko, and I would say the whole body of work from Richard Kelly. So Donnie Darko, Southland Tales, and The Box.
Yeah, all of that. Yes.
And he has such a unique take on it that even though I don't think those movies are masterpieces, they are fascinating to watch. Uh, Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Yes, completely.
Yeah.
It's like they're even though like is it completely American like at times where I just kind
I
of
think so. I think
okay,
because the main guy was a child actor, once again,
yes.
who was in the Broadway production of The Secret Garden back in like
Okay.
the 90s or 80s or something. Uh, I Heart Huckabees.
Yes, even though like it becomes tragically sad when you find out about the director.
David O. Russell is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Monkey Bone, I think, is a failed attempt at this. The people who made that, I don't think understood late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque. So they make a thing that's like it, and that's why it doesn't work, is because it feels like it, but not it.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of Cool World.
Yes, Cool World.
Which is just like
Would you say that's in this genre?
No, it just that and Monkey Bone hover around it, not really like grasping why it is that people want to go into fantasy.
You know what I would lump those movies in with?
What?
The Adventures of Ford Fairlane with what's his face, that horrible comedian Andrew Dice Clay.
Yeah.
Where it feels like he's trying to make something that's like Americana Grotesque, but he actually revels in the chauvinism of America. Yeah,
in order to participate in it.
Like his career is kind of American. The Jerky Boys, I think, fit into this too. Yeah.
Like when you think about it, like Roger Rabbit fits in this.
No.
Does it not?
No. Roger.
Why?
Okay, well, let's go back to the tenets. It has noir styling for sure.
Yeah.
Americana Nightmare Labyrinth.
Yes.
In what way?
Well, think about the fact
maybe
that
Toontown, I guess. Toontown. Yeah. Satirical. Yep.
Yeah.
Otherworldly, surreal.
Yes.
God damn it. Hopeless search for
power and love. Like he's trying to find out if like is his wife cheating on him? Is his not
exploitation,
cheating?
Perverse sexuality. God damn it, you're gonna get camp or nostalgic.
Is it a yes or
Don't
a yes?
Look at me. Happily Never After. It does have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Typically 3 stars. This is a little bit higher. Punk feel, but it is Zemeckis, and we were talking about, I guess, Zemeckis is
so it fits
well
like a glove
for now. The Grinch and the Cat in the Hat movies, at least distant cousins.
Yeah, they are distant cousins because the Grinch ends up too happy at the end.
I feel like the Cat in the Hat is much closer. Like Mike Myers is always right in the periphery of this, but he won't dive into the deep end.
You know, as a good guy. Like,
yeah.
Think about like my wife is an axe murderer. Like,
yes, that's in the genre for sure. I didn't even think about. No, it's So I Married an Axe Murderer. Yes, yeah. But we're gonna have to add that to the canon.
One of the scenes in the movie is like, look at his big head. He'll be crying in his huge pillow tonight.
Look at his big head. Yeah. I still love Stephen Wright. Oh, I forget. He's so good in that because he's the pilot.
Yeah.
I think that's flying them. Oh, they just have such great lines. Going back to Michael Bay's Pain and Gain. It is.
I gave it to you, even though I fucking hate that.
It's not about whether you like the movie. It's not about if you like. I hate Michael Bay too. I hate Michael Bay too. But Pain and Gain is late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque. It is. Yeah. The filmmakers, people involved that I think if you see them on a movie, it's probably this. Tilda Swinton.
Yeah.
Lynn Ramsey, even though she's not American. Ratcatcher is kind of a Scottish version of this. Then you have We Need to Talk About Kevin. Not as funny.
Very much about America.
You Were Never Really Here.
Ooh.
It doesn't have the satirical humor.
I just love that film.
It's a beautiful film, yeah. Jonathan Glazer. So we're thinking Sexy Beast, Birth, Under the Skin. I would say The Zone of Interest does not qualify because it's about an actual thing that happened.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's Under the Skin for me really fits this because it's that nightmare. It doesn't the Americana, but it's kind of the Anglophile kind of angle. Edgar Wright's movies feel like a sunnier version of this. Charlie Kaufman. He may be the saint of this in the 2000s and 2010s.
When you think about being like
John Malkovich,
that is probably part
adaptation.
Yeah.
Synecdoche, New York.
Yeah, those gotta be
Anomalisa, the stop motion film he did. That's
so heartbreaking.
yeah, and disgusting too.
Yeah.
And then I've been thinking of ending things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then if you want to see the French version of this, I say Michel Gondry's films. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
And then he made a movie with Gael Garcia Bernal, which I cannot recall the name of, but I think fits this.
The director that made I'm a Virgo.
Well, he's
Yeah.
coming up later. And then I would also say Be Kind, Rewind is kind of a crowd pleaser version of this.
Yeah. I've never seen that film.
It's not that good. It's definitely like a 3-star movie. I think Guillermo del Toro, specifically The Shape of Water, feels like late stage capitalist Americana grotesque,
Yeah.
but as a love story kind of a thing.
And I think it's also he can make it a little bit better because he doesn't personally have that nostalgia from being Mexican.
I'd say most of his work doesn't fit this, but like that does.
Yeah.
So when we think about where late stage capitalist Americana grotesque can be found now, here are some of the places I think you can still find it, new stuff coming out. There are directors and people we've mentioned previously who are still making things. I just kind of brought them up in the period where they came to prominence.
Mm-hmm.
So the films, or shows in this case, American Horror Story and Scream Queens. I think selected seasons of American Horror Story, The Murder House,
Yeah.
Asylum.
Yes.
I think no on Coven. Coven gets
Coven gets a little too X-Men ish.
Yeah.
And mind you, I love the lore like of witches and stuff, but it just
it didn't feel like it was really witches. They just felt like they were mutants.
Yeah.
Beau is Afraid. I feel like that might be the strongest example of this genre to have come out recently.
I still love that about Beau is Afraid. I had more anxiety when he's out on the phone with his mother than when he's being chased down the street.
When they're in his apartment and he's locked out, that gave me anxiety because it's people in your space and you don't want.
Or like worse, like you turn the key's in there, you turn around, the key's gone.
Well, when he's in the bathtub after the party's over and he looks up and there's a guy who's got his arms and legs stretched out and then he falls into the bathtub and then they just like spin around in the water. It's so disgusting. The recent Showtime series, The Curse.
Yeah.
I feel like anything Nathan Fielder does, he's almost doing like the reality show version of late stage capitalist Americana grotesque.
Yeah, I mean,
like The Rehearsal.
Yeah, and also like, didn't he get compared to like the Wizard of Oz like during the rehearsal?
Yeah. Yeah, they were like, "Oh, you're like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain." Yeah.
The look on his face, he's like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And it got closer, and it's as if he realized that someone was on to him.
They figured out like what he's doing. The Joker.
Unfortunately, yes.
I think it's more of like a normie film that fits into this category, because anybody thinks like the Joker is actually edgy doesn't watch movies. They just watch whatever's in the theater.
I mean, the Joker is just a remake of the King of Comedy.
Yes, exactly. Under the Silver Lake with Andrew Garfield.
Yeah.
Ingrid Goes West.
Yeah.
That was when I thought that's a great example of like from a female perspective, which you don't get often in the genre.
Like including the social media part of it.
And that's what makes it more contemporary, but still clings to the genre. Jordan Peele's Us. I don't think Get Out or Nope fit in this as smoothly, but Us definitely does. The Tim and Eric movie. The Tim and Eric's whole career, Bedtime Stories, awesome show, great job. Tom Goes to the Mayor. Like we were talking about On Cinema, At the Cinema,
especially like the nightmare fueled ones are just the ones that fit perfectly into it.
Armando Iannucci's Veep, or adjacent.
I think it's adjacent. It's a little too set in reality.
By the time you get to the end, I think it gets closer to becoming this genre.
Yeah.
It becomes less grounded and more cartoonish by the end.
Especially like when it comes to like what the future
holds. Sorry to Bother You and I'm a Virgo from Boots Riley.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I feel like Us is there, but I feel like Boots Riley is a much more prominent, 3D, 2D, 3D, 2D, 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 Black perspective on this genre of
And
film.
he's also openly a communist, so
Well, he did something with he like directed one of Patton Oswalt's comedy specials, which makes me feel like, are you a communist or are you just like a well-meaning
well,
liberal
when did he do that? Because
in
that's
the last couple years?
okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. I do think those pieces of art
But
qualify.
the thing is, like, I'm a Virgo has amazing parts when it talks about like
I'm not gonna
socialism.
completely give it to it.
Yeah,
But I will say it meets the aesthetic and thematic qualifications.
yeah,
Los Espookies,
that is definitely God.
Latin American take.
I love it so much because what I love about Los Spookies is that I remember one time, I think we were watching like the second season, and you and I start getting into an argument as to where it was set because you were just like, oh, it's Mexico. And then you're like, oh, no, it's Peru. And it just got to the point that I looked at you, it's like, it's nowhere.
And that's it's set in a and that's kind of what I thought about like with some of the other things. Like The Dark Backward is not set in a city we know.
No, it's just like it's supposed to be all Latin America in one place. And that's what makes it even funnier because they're just like, yeah, Americans can't tell where we are, so fuck it.
So when we look at the filmmakers, the people who are before we get a little away from that, I would say Julio Torres, his career is late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque. The Toys for Sensitive Boys skit from SNL. And I have a feeling that movie Problemista, that's just I think come out or about to be coming out, is going to fit into this genre because it's an immigrant perspective on this view of
American
America.
dream.
Yeah. The people you can find making these movies, including some movies we didn't bring up, Jim Hosking, who has made The Greasy Strangler and An Evening with Beverly Loughlin.
Yeah, films that I don't recommend for everybody.
I say The Greasy Strangler is a 5-star film that I don't ever recommend to people.
It is
because it accomplishes what he wanted.
Yeah, it was one of those times that you gave 5 stars, not because it was like, ooh, what technicality. It's just like he knew what he wanted to make, and that was exactly what he made.
I think Connor O'Malley's body of work on YouTube is like the cutting edge version of this.
Haunting.
He's taking the themes of this genre and planting them firmly in a like post social media age where like the American and especially like a COVID era kind of nightmare. The Safdie brothers movies,
anxiety inducing,
everything from like Daddy Longlegs to Heaven Only Knows to Good Time to Uncut Gems, which is Adam Sandler again. Adam Sandler shows up in a lot of these movies
despite being a conservative prick.
Yes. I think if you're looking for a different perspective, Yorgos Lanthimos, particularly The Lobster and The Killing of a Sacred Deer in particular. That one, I don't think the favorite is because it's a period piece and it gets too far away. Poor Things that's way too like mid-tier Tim Burton in terms of aesthetics. But if you go to something like The Killing of a Sacred Deer, it feels like our world, but it's not our world kind of a thing. And then from South Korea, I would say Bong Joon-ho's Parasite fits into this in terms of its late stage South Korean night or grotesque.
Yeah.
So we've got to come to the end of our notes here. Do we feel that you would be willing to go to bat to defend this as at least subgenre of cinema?
Yeah, and it's also the influences. Like it doesn't exclusively have to be like Americana, but it's like late stage capitalism coming in and like strangling.
But I would say the reason I say late stage capitalist Americana grotesque as the title is that I feel that the movies that meet those elements most strongly are from people who are looking back at growing up in America and finding things that they love, but also seeing a dark side to things that they loved. And it's this sort of reckoning with nostalgia, you could call it.
Yeah, and it's not doing this in a fuzzy, loving light. It's almost damning it to hell when you think about it, about that nostalgia. Like it's this strange thing about when you think about like at the least David Lynch interviews, he talks about how he likes the aesthetics of the 1950s, but it doesn't feel as if he thinks that it's precious. And I think that is what's lacking in a lot of films when it comes to nostalgia. It's just like this highlighting of going like, wasn't this a great time? Wasn't it good? And it's just like, but there's something dark underneath that we're not talking about.
Would you say Channel Zero on Sci-Fi Channel fits late stage capitalist Americana Grotesque?
Yeah.
I think it does.
Yeah.
And that made me think of We're All Going to the World's Fair, written and directed by Jane Schoenbrow, which feels like a zoomer viewpoint on this genre. And which makes me think her next film, which has debuted at Sundance and gotten rave reviews, I Saw the TV Glow, I think is definitely going to be something that's like a modern, dark, backward type of thing.
Yeah.
So we have shared all these things with you. There are probably other movies that could be included on these lists that we just didn't think of. And this is something where this is something I think I'm going to stick with. I told you last night, while, I'm high on my edible, I said, oh, this is like stimulating my autistic brain so strong right now. I said I can't even explain to you how I'm visualizing the way I'm making connections right now. Yeah, connect the dots. Yeah. And I said it almost felt like little chain links, like just falling into place, where you're like, oh yeah, that, and then that means if that is, then this is, and it all just keeps coming together. So it feels so natural. But yeah, I'd like to know what our audience thinks. If there are any films you think should be included, or do you think we're just calling something a genre that isn't a genre? Well, we hope you enjoyed this rather unique episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out the show notes to any links or relevant things that we talked about during this episode, including the link to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe to be notified wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll know when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog, you'll find even more reviews. We post there every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on the weekends. This coming month in April, we will be looking at selected films of Mike Leigh, the British director. And this first week of April has some big ones in it. We'll be reviewing High Hopes, Life is Sweet, and then Naked, which I consider a masterpiece movie, and Secrets and Lies, which I've also heard is one of his great movies. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on the blog, we'd encourage you to support us on Patreon. We've got lots of different reward levels for you to choose from. And I'd like to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the Writers Room level. When you donate at that level, you get to select a film every month that we will watch and review, and you can even include your own thoughts in that review if you want. No matter what level you become a patron at, you'll get access to patron-exclusive podcasts. We do little mini-series here and there. Right now, we're currently doing a tabletop role-play mini-series, just the two of us using some solo tools to play through that. Next week's episode, we're going to be looking at two movies that might qualify as late-stage capitalist Americana Grotesque. We'll find out. And those movies are the recent releases Love Lies Bleeding and Drive Away Dolls. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.